which you must understand very closely. That is why all the repertoire, your classical repertoire as a dancer, comes from Geet Govinda and from nowhere else. Apart from the fact that because these were temple dances and they were preserved in temples and they could be performed as Ashtapadis, and as a matter of fact, Ashtapadis were written by Jayadev for a very famous Devadasi called Padmavati. Padmavati Charana Charana Chakravarati. He calls himself, Jayadev calls himself, that he is the king of whom Padmavati Charana Charana. He is the king of those who worship the feet of Padmavati. And Padmavati is also the temple dancer and she is also Radha. Both. So when you come to describe Leelaa, and Leelaa is done by any divinity as a human being. And therefore Vishnu, when he takes an Avataara, just as the actor takes an Avataara on the Rangabhumi, Rangavataara, and does a role, similarly God comes and does a role, a Leelaa. And it is by enacting an anukriti of that Leelaa that we create Natya. So Leelaa, once it is human, once it is very variegated, and once it is human, has eternal possibilities. So there is story of Rama in one version of Ramayana saying something, in another version not saying the same thing. Right? Or there are different kinds of descriptions of Rama. There are all the time people now worry about how many descriptions of Ram are there, but in the traditional scholarship that's not an issue. Nana bhanti Rama Avataara, Ramayana Shatakoti Apara. Tulsidas is not worried about. Because there is Apara Leelaa. Leelaa cannot end. There will be many avatars, many Leelas, many poets, many writers, dramatists will see that Leelaa in many different ways. And if that is so, then how can you have Shantarasa? If you look at it logically, Bharat Muni therefore talks only of 8 bhavas, and he also says that primary there are 4. And he says, the shlok is, Shringarad bhavet hasyo. Shringarad bhavet hasyo raudratcha karuno rasah bibhatsat adbhutotpattihi, virat adbhutotpattihi bibhatsatcha bhayanaka. Now there can be no laughter if there is no Shringara. So here we have what is called the Karya Karak Sambandha. That one act leads to another. If there is Shringar, if there is an erotic situation, then there would be laughter. If there is no erotic situation, if there is no relationship between man and woman and a happy relationship, then of course if there is separation and vipralam, you will cry. Or if that situation does not prevail, and if you still want to use hasya, humor, then that humor becomes black humor, black satire. You know, there are genres, non-Indian genres, which become satirical situation, which are not the situation of happiness. So, Shringarat Bhavedasyo, Raudracha Karuno Rasa, when something very terrible happens, unjustifiably, and the situation is piteous, then there is karuna. If a thief is put to jail, you are very happy. You don't cry over it. It's not a piteous situation. It's only when an innocent, when a Harishchandra is punished by a Vishwamitra, reduced to abject poverty, and his wife and children are separated, then you have that piteous situation, therefore karuna. When a great man performs a task like Rama creating the Setu, then you say this is adbhuta. And when you see most repulsive things like a spectacle of destruction, then you feel the fear. Now, why 4 only? I think we have asked a very important question, and so that we can think about that question, you need to take your lunch, and for that we should end the present session. But before we break this session, maybe 1 or 2 questions could be asked pertaining precisely to what has been discussed in the last half an hour. So if you have any questions, I know most people don't like to ask questions just before lunch, so it is understandable, and hence we come back now at 1:30. We have changed the timings from 1 to 1:30, and I'll see you then. Thank you for the patient listening. I knew there would be no Veer to ask an Adbhut question. All right. So, should we begin? Well, we are back here after our lunch, food. There is a saying in Hindi, Anna so na priya ko. There is nothing which is as lovable as food. Right? I mean, you won't fall for a man unless he is able to provide you good food. Otherwise, you would be a stupid girl. And vice versa. If a woman can't provide good food to eat, a bachelor's life is much better. Now, when we are going to talk in the afternoon, after food, of a subject, then unless that subject is related to food, we won't get very far. Fortunately, the subject is related. We were talking of rasa, and rasa comes from the very primary metaphor of chewing, charvana, tasting. It is based on something very simple, very sensory. Of course, you may have heard of profound sayings like raso vai saha, etc., that describing Brahma as rasa, etc., Taittiriya Upanishad. But in the Natya Shastra, they talk of rasa as basically something which illustrates the act, which is illustrated by the act of eating. So when, after going through the Rasa Sutra, we go to the Drishtanta Sutra, or the sutra which illustrates, which gives the extended example, then you will find that they are using the metaphor of eating, about food. And they'll explain, just as you get pleasure or harsha by eating, how people who know how to eat food properly, sumanasaha purushaha, people who can taste food. Here, sumanasaha purushaha also includes women, although without women there will be no good food to eat. So, the example is that just as because of certain things you get the taste in food and you get the enjoyment, sumanasaha purushaha harshadi madhigacchati, they experience harsha, pleasant. Similarly, because of certain things, in Natya you experience rasa. So, the act of eating, the act of chewing is the primary metaphor used in rasa. But before we come to the topic of this deep topic of rasa, let us come to something with which Bharat Muni had started the chapter on rasa, and that was on Bhavas. Now here you have to understand one thing. In this chapter, there is a psychological theory which is propounded. We all know that we have emotions and thought, mental states, and that there are different kinds of emotions, right? Not just the 8 we mentioned, but many other, like laziness, dainya, autsukya, apasmara, irshya, etc., etc. So many. Emotions are endless and there are so many. Now, the theory that Bharat Muni makes is, he proposes that there is a difference between one category of emotion from the other. That the emotions can be divided very reasonably into 2 categories. Some emotions which he calls thai, bhava, and some others which he calls vyabhichari or sanchari. And he says that these emotions are really different. Now you would say that this is a kind of a hypothetical difference. Hypothetical, hypothesis means a statement, a presumption about things. So it's a theory which is propounded here. Because you can always question that can there be sthai bhavas? Why can't any emotion be sthai bhava? Bharat Muni doesn't go to explain that, but he presumes, and he says that some emotions are there. Now this is not very unusual, because in modern psychology, the psychologists also talk of certain fundamental states, emotional states, which they call drives. And behaviorists and psychologists and behavior psychologists, they in psychology, they presume that there are 3 or 4 drives or urges, emotions which are very fundamental. And according to this classification, the European classification, desire to eat or desire for food, the drive for food, the drive for shelter, and the drive to reproduce or sexual drive, they consider to be primary. Then sometimes people add self-esteem, and then later on many psychologists put a few other things which they call secondary drive. The point to be noted is that even in the modern European system, all emotional states are not considered to be the same. That some kind of categorization is done. Some are considered to be far more strong, dominating than others. So here we have a parallel in the ancient Indian tradition. According to the classification given in the Natya Shastra, these 8 states will always be there, or even if you have other emotion which is called Vyabhichari Bhav or Sanchari Bhav, then this emotion would be lurking behind. For instance, if I am down and out, and if I need something, let's say I am begging for something before an important person from whom I want something, then I am in a state of what is called dainya, deenata. I am very lowly. And when I am asking for something, there is an emotion of fear in me all the time. Whether the prayer would be granted or not. That this person is strong, this person is influential, this person is much above me. So I am afraid. So bhaya always accompanies dainya. Right? If bhaya accompanies dainya, if bhaya is there, then in that case, that emotion is somewhere or the other influencing my dainya. And if it is influencing, then it is dominating. So this is the kind of reason which is not explicitly stated, but which is presumed in the theory of Natya Shastra. Whatever Bharat Muni doesn't explicate, some other Bharatas can explain, isn't it? So explaining this, I would say that the dominating emotion will always be around what is called a Sanchari Bhav. Now, Vyabhichari and Sanchari, by their very definition, mean that they cannot last for a very long time. So if my prayer of dainya, in dainya is not granted, if I am just thrown out of the door, if I have gone to somebody for, let's say, a prayer for a job, and the person very arrogantly tells the chauffeur or the serviceman there, show him the door, don't come ever again, how dare you come in? If I hear all these words, then either I'll be very deeply afraid, or I'll have pity on myself, that what the hell, I am the lowliest of the person. What should I live for? I should go and kill myself. So I'll have a feeling of pity, self-pity, acute, or I'll be angry. What does he think of himself? Can't he help me? If my pride takes over, then I shall be angry. So, again, the krodha, again anger, it comes in. Again it comes in as the dominant bhava. So you will see that in almost any of the so-called vyabhichari rasa, vyabhichari bhava, there is no sustenance of that bhava for a very long time. Because that bhava is dominated, sustained by one of the dominant bhavas, sthayi bhavas. This is the observation, presumption, hypothesis that we have in the Natya Shastra, and therefore the division into sthayi and into sanchari. Sanchari and vyabhichari, they mean the same because they both come from the word chara. And chara is movement. You see, things that move, that is chara. The word chara and sara. Sarati also means movement, sarpa, and charati also means movements.